As you know, micro merchants intermediate a very large majority of retail volume, so any kind of transformation from cash to digital would necessitate their participation. And we felt that, while there has been a lot of policy intervention, the creation of public infrastructure and new institutions to enable digitization, there was a paucity of last mile, granularity of insight around last mile challenges. That's what we set as our objective. The challenges of serving the last mile are fairly evident, and I think we all know them. There's difficult economics in terms of low ticket sizes, high cost to serve, onerous data and application requirements. There are constrained user capabilities. So an interesting statistics is that 3/4 of the Indian population, adult population, lacks basic financial literacy, and that can also be seen in the penetration rates. Just bank accounts in terms of active usage is only half. Third, there's complicated infrastructure. So, all the talk of smartphones, only 50% of the population, roughly own one. 900 million still have no access to data. And then lastly, there are behavioral and cultural factors, gender dynamics that shape women's ability to access and make financial decisions. There are linguistic barriers, and there is also just the issue of trust, particularly when it comes to financial instruments and solutions. So in 2017, we set out to establish what we called a Digital Payments Lab, which has hosted a series of interrelated experiments in digitizing cash-based ecosystems. And we worked not just with merchants, but with their counterparties, both suppliers as well as consumers, to understand behaviors and opportunities to digitize. We found that there was no perceived cost of cash among the individual actors in cash-based transactions. And so, digital solutions really need to be a driver of business revenue and business transformation, as opposed to just a way to focus on cash-based inefficiencies. Second, we found that there was no one-size-fits-all. Transaction economics and context shapes merchant openness to digital payments, right? And what I mean by economics and context includes things like average ticket size, the fraction of repeat customers, frequency and velocity of transactions, nature of transactions, whether it's remote or even the timing of it, whether it's made at the time of the rendering of service or later, so on and so forth. So those characteristics were quite important in influencing traction. Third, businesses were largely unwilling to invest in digital payment solutions till they saw their customers demand it. And on the flip side, when we worked with consumers, there is a lot more propensity for them to convert or be nudged. And sometimes those nudges do not even require monetary incentives. And that makes sense if you think about some of the vested interests and that are part of the ecosystem. Trust is paramount, and technology has to work reliably along with customer assurances to mitigate risks. And I think this is particularly relevant to some of the new nascent technologies like UPI, AEPS, which are still they're still not entirely mature. Maybe AEPS more than UPI. And then lastly, users that stand to gain are often least equipped to use these tools.
We all know that after 2 p.m. every Indian is unbanked because the banks are closed, and our belief is no different, because before 2 p.m. every Indian is underbanked because there is a large crowd outside the bank branches. So it leaves for an opportunity to try and see if we can diffuse the concentration of banking at a shop nearby, at a retailer nearby whom you trust. On a totality, if you see, a nearest mutual fund seller is 20 kilometers away, insurance agent is 15 kilometers away, a bank on a total base would be 5 kilometers away from a customer, but a shop is nearby, is 100 meters, 10 meters nearby. And what if we are able to orchestrate all the resource pool on an API, connect to the platform and cater to the customers at the shop nearby? You trust the shopkeeper with the grocery and the milk that you carry back home for your kid, and the retailer trusts you by giving you that small little credit that he gives. So the idea is of bringing inclusive digital finance by reskilling retailer step by step. What does it take to reskill retailer? He already knows WhatsApp, he already does Facebook, he already is on Flipkart, killing himself by buying there, or on a Amazon or an online platform. So there are 18 tracks we understand on fintech. We are here to work on sachetizing, digitizing, granularizing and universalizing it in a manner which can be accelerated through social platform, through digital platforms. And that is the whole endeavor about the digital brought to the physical network. We call it digital network. So basics first, ABCD is the inclusion. We have been lucky to stumble upon all the products in the same sequence hierarchy of ABCD, EFGHI. A is Aadhaar ATM, which is Pratyaksham Pramanam. You are who you are, you say you are in front of me right now. You put your thumb and you withdraw money. So large mass in India who is entitled to DBT is able to access their money. Unfortunately, while the ATMs are not viable truly in rural penetration, but this small gadget of $1,000, $2,000 is immensely viable and relevant to each shopkeeper, and we pray that the budget adoptions in some form makes it mandatory for each shopkeeper to have a Aadhaar device.
So that we don't have to go to each vendor and have to onboard him manually. That part could be taken care by them. Third part is on the revenues. Basically, and then he realizes the value pretty late, 2 to 3 months. So these 2 to 3 things in the ecosystem, in the payment collection scenarios are kind of challenging for our business, and we are constantly working on it.
But what is left behind is a vast segment of small, medium enterprises, retailers that are spread across the length and breadth of the country, for whom digitization has not really happened over the last 40 years. So things are as it is over the last 40 years, and this is where we see a vast white space to operate upon. So this particular space has particular characteristics that are different from either the consumer space, payment space, or the enterprise payment space. So just to list a few of these characteristics, payments are always done after a credit period. So if a distributor supplies goods to retailers, there is a 15-day, 20-day or a 1-month credit period involved, right? The collection process, unlike a consumer space where the payment is volunteered or made by the payer, or an enterprise space where the payments are volunteered by the payer, in this particular segment, the payee needs to collect money from the payer, from the retailer, and that makes it all the more challenging for digitization to take root here. Reconciliation is required for both parties, unlike in a consumer space where a consumer is not very particular about reconciling his transactions. Last but not the least, even as we speak, about 80 to 90% of this particular segment is in cash. So as much as we digitize the consumer to retailer segment, or we digitize the enterprise payment, if the SMEs are not digitized, it's still about 80 to 90% cash transactions happening in this particular space, and therefore this we think is an extremely important segment that needs to be digitized if we truly need to digitize the economy as a whole, right? So to sort of focus our attention on that particular segment, collections, the way distributors supply the goods to retailers, the retailers take about 15 days or a month to make a payment, and these distributors go around and run around retailers to collect payments. There's an immense collection process involved, and this collection process is extremely complex, right? And just to give you a sense of the scale of the business involved in this particular segment, on a monthly basis in the retail industry, there are about 300 million invoices generated to against about 15 million retail outlets in the country by about 30,000 distributors, and over 90% of it is completely unorganized. You see the roadside kirana shops, mom and pop stores. These constitute about 90% of the retailer space, and these are completely unorganized.
Lidofin really comes from the fact that they are just people who would find it very, very hard to engage in the area of financial solutions. I began my career with ICICI Bank. I started off as a part of the microfinance team, and I've been there since 2001 looking at this entire area. I've interacted with a lot of you in the past on this subject. And around 2005, 2006, I decided to quit and start to think about how do you add multiple financial services to the lives of individuals. And it was with this that I founded IFMR Trust. And then we tried to take a shot at seeing how could we experiment with the customer getting access to multiple financial services. The dream for us is continued, and I think Kaleidofin is our effort now to see how do we take a multiple suite of financial services to the customer. How do we make sure that a customer has multiple ways to be able to manage their risks and make the most of their life. The big insight with which we started off as Kaleidofin was that most people find it very, very hard to put together a financial plan for themselves.
Thank you. Let's do the next one.
I am Pratyush Halan, founder at FinPay. Coming to the business model, so in terms of business model, as I mentioned, one is a banking correspondent model through retailers. Another is a microfinance solutions where verifications and onboarding. And these two models go hand in hand, which ultimately the retailer is the end consumer. The customer is then addressed via both the ways, whether it's a nearest retailer or it's lending company. Then training, capacity building. So the first agenda when we started was to build an application which is extremely simple, extremely vernacular, so that we don't need any training to the field force. So basically we don't have any training module as of today. It's all so simple that customers can just flow through it. In terms of low network connectivity, again we had another big USP here, like we made our application so seamless that it works on 2G networks very seamlessly, so it does not need any high bandwidth or a high cost smartphone, and that is what we have been believing so far.
All right, let's bring this to an end. And a round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you.